Hey everyone, and welcome to another critique. So this week you got to experiment with your own face, and that is usually kind of scary and kind of fun. So I hope everybody did at least enjoy having yourself as a model. And you know, it's a part of a great legacy of art, right? Many artists have done self-portraits. Usually that's very much a part of the process of learning too, because you're a cheap model, like it or not. So I think these came out really rather nice. I enjoyed looking through the different pieces, and I think everybody really stepped up, did some interesting work here. All right, so look at so let's take a look at this piece. So I really like this, and it looks like you did a watercolor or an ink wash with ink, which is really bold, and I think that's commendable because that's not very forgiving when you're working with a process like that. And when you mess up, you're kind of stuck with your results. So I think overall you did good. It looks like the proportions overall seem pretty right on. Have a good sense of volume. Have a good sense of contrast as well. So you push your darks and lights. So there's this nice contrast. You do have some areas where it kind of flattens a little bit. So I think the glasses, for example, notably the smile. I feel like the smile is getting kind of flat. And so one of the tricks about parts of the face is that you can have a more or less of a curve. And so the mouth in particular has a curve, right? The overall front of the face has a curve. But the mouth has a stronger sense of curve, especially because the teeth have a stronger sense of the curve. And as you're studying the skull, I'm sure you've probably noticed that there's a more intense curve. And so usually the perspective needs to be a little bit more thought out on the mouth. And so with a three-quarter view like this, you want to make sure that this back side of the mouth has a little bit more perspective and a little bit more curve around the back than the front side. Okay, so the center line here, right now it looks almost half and half. So your center line is about equal this side and this side, whereas you want that center line to probably be, maybe like a third, or this side of the mouth, I should say, should be about a third compared to 2/3 or something like that. So just a little tweak. But again, when you're working with the face, it's really easy to be off by a little bit, right? And the thing is, we're probably, most of the time when we're drawing, we're off by a little bit. But you notice it so much when you're drawing the face. You're like, oh, it's really good, but something's a little bit off. There's always that little sense of something being a little bit off that you can't define. And that's the difficulty of the face, is that just this little hairline, millimeter this direction or that direction, makes a huge difference in how it reads. And so again, another reason why working with the face and your own face can be really quite a good learning experience, because it really makes you learn to observe and pick out that fine detail. So I think, again, overall it's really nice, good sense of volume, nice play with the materials, some nice, like the ink washes are looking really good. Just some little areas where it kind of flattens out, but I do think it came out really quite nice. So this might be just a variation one that's a little bit lighter. So again, sometimes how you shoot it might be different, but it still looks good. I think it's a very strong piece either way. This came out really nice. There's a kind of a soft modeling to the skin, so there's not really a sense of a strong light direction, but you do get like a soft modeled form to it, and I think it looks nice. There's a good sense of proportion. I like even the composition of it, the way that you've cropped in a particular way. Looks really good. I think the eyes could get maybe just a little bit more variation in the light and dark within them, so there's some hints, little things like the little thing in the corner of your eye. Some lights and darks that could actually happen on the lights of the eye themselves. Your texture is great. I love especially the texture in the hair. And so some of those drawing elements, like the texture and the form and the value, I think are looking really good. It looks like you have some lighting coming from the side here. So I think you could get a little bit more clarity on that shadow over here, just to help get that sense of volume a little bit further. But again, nice proportions. Nice drawing, nice sense of modeling altogether. I like that piece. All right, looks good. There's something about the proportion seems just a little bit off. I think it's in the eyes. So one of the things you'll notice is that with the eye, especially so from a front point of view, you can measure. There's one eye length for the eye, obviously, right? An eye length between the eyes, and then an eye length from the side of the eye to the edge of the head. And so you end up with 5 eye lengths. So you get this kind of alternating eye. And that can help you. And so I feel like that's probably where it's going wrong. So this eye feels like it's kind of moving a bit to my left. And it's making this a little bit wider, and then it's getting closer to that edge of the face. And so that, I think, could just kind of come in a little bit and get cleaned up. And then you can also line up the eye to the mouth, and that actually looks pretty good, but I still think you could move that in just a little bit, and that proportion would feel a little bit more natural. It looks like you have the distance, so the middle of the eye is the middle of the head. And so if you look at that proportion to the top of the head and then to the bottom of the chin, that's usually a good judge to kind of figure out where things are at. So there's a little bit of space between the top of the hairline and then the back of the head, so there's kind of this slope where it goes from here back, so that creates this more mass on the top of the head than sometimes we get in the drawing. And so that plus, you know, if there's any kind of body to the hair, you usually have to kind of compensate for that. So there's a little bit more mass at the top sometimes than what we give it credit for. But again, overall, I think this looks rather nice. Chin feels a little bit big at the bottom, and just a little bit asymmetrical, so kind of getting pushed to the side just a touch there. And then the nose, this side of the nose feels like it's kind of sloping down just a little bit. So this is where construction lines are really helpful. So if you have one line for the eyes, the other for the nose is going to go in the same direction, the other for the mouth. There might be some tweaks for perspective, but if you get those construction lines, that'll help you line things up and get those little nuances a little bit more accurately. This is really a fun piece. There's a little bit of stylization going on, especially the eyes have this kind of manga-esque look to them a little bit. So just be cautious about that. So, you know, I remember being in school and always hearing stylization is a really bad word, you know, and if somebody said, oh, there's some stylization happening, it was the worst thing ever. I don't feel as extreme about that. I think stylization has a place, right? Stylization is a kind of a shorthand, right? It's how you draw from memory, typically. I think the key is making your stylization more complex, not getting complacent with one particular style. And this can happen today with, you know, especially with the popularity of things like manga. People bring a lot of that influence into the work. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just that you want to be smarter than that. You want to know where to use it and when not to use it. I think it was James W. Turner who said that nature are the notes, right? And we are like the keys of the piano where we're arranging those notes in a particular way. And I think a way that you can think of what that means is that you look at the world and you draw in these different things. And so my thought is you draw everything, right? You study the things that even don't seem interesting to you. Like, for me, that'd be manga. I'm not as interested in it, but, you know, I want to draw some of those influences because there are times and places where I might want to use that particular nose, or that particular mouth, or that particular eye. And those are, knowing those things allows you to be able to draw that when you need to. Okay, so I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's just my thought of that. When you are working, strive, you know, especially in a class like this, strive for as much true to life, natural look as you possibly can. Because what you're doing is you're pulling from nature to learn. You're drawing from what you're seeing, and you're building yourself up from that. So that when you're drawing something that you want to stylize or that's from your imagination, you have this well of information that you can draw from. If you pick one style and you always stick with that, you're going to be limited. It's always going to be limited to what you can do. If you're a manga artist, that may be all that you can do. Maybe you do a great job at it. That's something to be said for that. But in the learning process, you want to be drawing as much information as you can. All right, sorry about the tangent. Overall, I think this is nice. I think it's really good. Sense of form. Some of the texture gets a little bit distracting, I think especially down here in the neck. Try to think about, just in the same way that cross contours do, your texture can follow the form and can accentuate what you have. There's the line of the eyes is right about here, but then the line of the nose kind of dips. So again, here you'd want that line to follow the line of the eyes. Actually, the line of the mouth is pretty close to that too. So it's just the nose kind of dips a little bit, and it's getting broken from that, from your base construction. So keep an eye out for that. I think a little bit more richness maybe in the hair, just in the volume would be nice. It's hard to tell exactly where the light is coming from. It might be frontal, but you could still put a little bit of volume or value on the hair to kind of get that sense of the volume. Overall, though, I think this is a nice piece. I think there's some really interesting stuff going on. This is interesting. I almost wish there would be, it was more of a dominant portrait. I like the composition. I like the way that you kind of played with the space and the hair. But because it's a small portrait and because it looks like you're working with oil pastel, you limit what you can do with some of those, some of the details in there. Now, the colors, I think out here especially, are working really quite well. But as you get into the face, they feel kind of muddy. And this is where some of that color theory that we were doing would be really good. So instead of just like a warm and then it looks like a gray or a black that you're using to make your shadows, I think you could do better by choosing like a violet. Violet usually works really well because it still has that red warmth to it, but it's cooled off a bit. So that's usually a really good skin tone color that feels really quite natural. You can even push into some blues and greens to a certain degree in the skin tones if you're careful. But I feel like it's just the muddiness of the color that's kind of getting this, it feels just a little bit out of place. Also, just remember there is shadow in the eye, right? So you have this real intensity of the white of the eyes, but with the light hitting in this direction, these would actually be in shadow. So even though the local color is brighter than the skin, you do want to think of that as, something that is a rounded form in the head that has its own light and dark hitting it. It's not glowing, so you don't want to have just straight white. You want to have some sense of tonality to it. So I think that would be important. The hair does get a little bit flat too, so I like how you have this real strong sense of the light, but then it doesn't apply to the hair. The hair is just kind of a flat texture of color. And again, the composition is interesting and really nice. I like the exploration of the colors in here. I think there's just a couple things you could do to really pull it together. I think the proportions on the face look nice. There's some, it looks like you have a good likeness. So overall, I think it's really strong. But again, just a couple little tweaks I think could have pulled this together a little bit more. So this one has just a little bit of a sense of being unfinished. There's some nice line work. And I really like these gestural kind of lines that you have up here. But you're losing some of your sense of the structure. You have a good start where I think some of your proportions look good, but then you get to an area like this and it's kind of getting distorted. The chin's getting pulled a little bit to the side. This cheek is getting a little bit dominant. Don't let those get too strong. Like some of those can start to distract. You want to be able to find that structure, but you don't. At the same time, you don't want to over stylize those structures and make them distracting. So here on the nose, it's getting a little bit flat and pushed up, and it's hard to read exactly like where the base planes are, in those different planes, like on the side of the nose, front of the nose, under the nose, and so on. So I think that's where I'm losing it. I think the eye, this is a really nice eye. This one's pretty good. I really like your gesture marks, and I almost want to see you be able to use those more, right? So if you had just some areas, okay, think of it like this. Your structure is going to be connected to either a more value-based buildup or line-based buildup, okay? You can go both either direction in any work that you have, right? But what you can do is that when you have one as your base structure, you can bring in the other one as a nice counterbalance. So let's say this one was all just line and gesture, because these marks are beautiful, right? You have a really nice hand for some of these marks. And you could build up the eyes and the nose and the mouth that way. But then you could go in and put some of these soft little transitions of value to act as a kind of accent. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. I'll look for some images and see if I can send them to you. That's just an idea of what I'm thinking of. And I think some of your soft like just softening some of those marks would look really good, because where you get these textures in here, those don't look so strong. The scribbly marks for the value, just not as strong as your scribble marks for gesture. Okay, and so I'm picking out that. I think you could just build more with your gesture marks and get something really nice. I hope that makes sense. So I'll send you an image and you can see, maybe get an idea what I'm thinking of here. It's really nice. I really like that you pushed into a real strong contrast of light and dark, and that's really nice. So there is a little bit of stylization. So here again, the almond shape of the eye is a little bit dominant. If you haven't watched my video on the 10 mistakes that people make in figure or portrait, watch that, and it's posted in the announcements with the whole list. But that's one of the things people tend to do, and this is where stylization can work against you. If you overdo the almond shape of the eye, it becomes less interesting because it's oversimplified. And there's some variation in the shape of the eye that's really interesting and worth trying to get. Apart from that, nice proportions. I love the design. I think the way that you cropped it, the way that you pushed your darks so that you have this light really pop out, looks super. Really like that. And the texture of the hair, the way it acts as a nice frame to the face, it's really, really lovely. So I think that's a really fun piece, and I think you did some nice stuff with that. So here's one where I feel like you have a style that you've built up that is almost taking away from what you could be doing. So again, you're kind of using style and you're accentuating certain things. You're building up certain lines, but you start to lose some of the potential realism that you could get. So we have this really narrow back of the head, and you're not really getting a good sense of the volume of the skull behind it. So you broaden the chin, you narrow in the head, and you're getting more of a caricature quality than you are a really realistic piece. Now again, that's where stylization can sometimes block you from being more observant, because you can get kind of honed in on this particular look, and you get good at it. It looks great. I mean, it's a beautiful caricature, but it loses the realism that you could be getting, right? You lose, the proportions that are more accurate, and the subtleties, right? I mean, subtlety is really one of those wonderful things, and you're losing some of those subtleties that you could be really playing with and finessing and fine-tuning to make into a really realistic kind of look. Again, that's that learning process, taking the time to really look at something and get to know it, so that you can draw more influence from it as a learning opportunity. I hope that makes sense. Again, I like your drawings. I think you have a natural style, but don't let that style get in the way of observation, and taking the time to really see changes in proportion, changes in direction and lines, instead of being too comfortable in the particularities of how you make marks, if that makes sense. All right, so you have an interesting setup on this one. I think you could push your lights and your darks. So down here, even just filling it out as dark, like just kind of blackening everything in, can usually be a good design solution. So when you're doing these drawings, don't think just about the problem of figuring out the face, but you're designing a whole work of art, right? And so you want to have some of that sense of light and dark contrast, like what we saw here in Diamond's piece, right? I mean, great, right? Here you have a really strong sense of design, right? So you want to keep some of that where the design is a part of the piece, and that usually is going to be usually, that's always something you should be thinking about. I think even in sketches and just little practices, getting an idea of what a composition would be is a good thing to be problem solving at any point in the work. So here we do have some of that stylization, the almond eyes. It's just, again, it's a simple way of approaching the eyes, but the eyes are much more complex than that. So you want to spend more time observing and looking for those nuances in the shape of the eye. The proportions don't look too bad. It looks like you have about the thirds, you have the eyes about the halfway point of the head. So at this point, it's a matter of building up more complexity in the work. Beware of these concave lines in the neck. That's an easy thing that people kind of tend to do. But it's not about what's going on in the neck, though, are muscles, right? And muscles fill out in space. So you have a muscle here that fills out, so you have a line or a convex line, and then you have the trapezius, which is a change in direction, right? So you have one line coming down the neck, which is usually the sternocleidomastoid coming down to the pit of the neck, and then you have the trapezius going in a different way. So think of, you can get a better sense of volume and anatomy simply by making sure that you're using straight lines against straight lines instead of convex lines, all right? Or sorry, concave lines. Concave being like this, where it's kind of cut in, like a bite's taken out of it. You don't want those in the figure. 99.9% of the time, you don't want those in the figure. And if you do have one, a good rule is if you ever do have a concave line in the figure, that on the opposing side of it should be a convex line, okay? So again, that's something to think about. I hope that makes sense, but this is a good start. I think it just needs a little bit more complexity and a little bit more observation of the form, and I think it would come across really well. This is really nice. It's very photographic, really. So it's, I really do get a sense of the likeness. These little subtle tonalities are really quite nice. And I like that you don't feel like you have to overdraw things. I mean, sometimes it's easier, like the line of the lips and the line of the nose, and we have to overdraw those elements. Sometimes just a little bit of modeling like this can do all that and can be all that you really need. So this little hint of a shadow on the side, a little hint underneath, a little bit on the nostrils, and then here in the lips is really nice. You can allow it to push a little bit darker in the corner of the lips, which is really nice. Overall, just a very beautiful piece. Love that soft modeling, proportions, volume. Everything's looking really good on that. This looks like a good start, but it feels a little unfinished, and I think just because you haven't pushed your darks very far. And so the face gets really lost into the lightness of it. There's some proportional issues, so look at the eye. I would expect the line to kind of follow here. You have it kind of coming up here, so there's this curve of the eyes. So think about your perspective. If I'm looking down, I expect a curve something like this. If this is curved that way, that could happen, but I want to make sure that the nose is doing that, and then the mouth. The mouth definitely is not doing that. The mouth is going down. So we have a line going this way, and then this way, and then kind of this way. So this might be just one of those things about self-portrait, is that every time you look, your face might move a little bit. So now your mouth is kind of here, now your eyes are kind of here. And sometimes that's okay, but when you have an image like this where the perspective has to be taken into account, because you have that extreme, directionality to the face, now perspective is going to be working against you. So you have to really make sure that these lines are going the same direction. And they're kind of getting off, and I think that's where it's getting weaker. This part of the head feels like it's kind of coming in a little bit. Usually you kind of want to fill that mass out just a little bit more. Again, look at the skull drawings, right? The skull really, it's pretty massive back there, and the high point is further back from the middle. So if you think about where center part of your skull is from back to front, the highest point of it is actually back a little bit. So it's about at the 2/3 point from the face back. So that usually creates a bit more mass in the back of the head than what we sometimes will think about putting in there. And again, you add hair to that, and you have a little bit of body to kind of fill out that space. So that, and then I would say push your darks so that you have that contrast, and I think this would be a stronger piece. But overall, it's a good start, and I think it's interesting to see here. Nice. This is looking pretty good. Again, like I said in some of the other ones, I think pushing the contrast and pushing the darkness would probably help, so you have that contrast of light and dark. It looks like the bottom of the face, nose, mouth, and chin are getting a little bit larger than the top, and that could be sometimes if you're drawing on like a flat table in front of you. Sometimes you can end up putting a little bit of perspective into it so that the face, the top of the head is a little bit smaller than the bottom. So I feel like that might be what's happening. It looks like you have a good sense of proportion. The eyes could be a little high, and I think you could need maybe a little bit more to the top of the head. But we are kind of looking up at it as well, so there's some of that. I do still feel like you could get a little bit more on the top of the head, maybe around here. And I think, yeah, it just seems like mostly it's kind of a perspective issue of the bottom part of the mouth and chin, where it feels like it's just expanding a little bit. Looks like a perspective thing. That's my guess. But yeah, it's a good start, and I think there's some really nice sense of the proportion and likeness. This is a fun piece. I like the impishness of it. You know, it has a kind of a little bit of a cartoonish quality, but not overly so. I mean, I still feel like there's a sense of identity to it. So the smile is getting a little bit stylized, and I think that's part of what it is. And then this eye just seems a little bit large. I know you have a perspective thing, but I still think you might be pushing that a little bit far. And then it's getting pretty close to the side of the head as well. Again, you think about in terms of like eye lengths, you do want to keep a little bit of the space for the side of the face, and then the temple. There's a little bit more distance. So you're kind of condensing the temple right up to the eyebrow. And I guess I mean, that could happen if you had a lot more hair, but I think you would have just at least a little bit more space in there. And then this cheek is getting a little bit big, so even like usually you're going to have kind of the eyebrow is going to kind of come out here, and then it kind of comes back in where the orbit of the eye is, and then it goes back out here. So this would be a little bit rounder because of the cheekbone, the zygomatic bone, if you remember on your skulls. There's a zygomatic bone and the zygomatic arch. We're going to fill that out a little bit more. So it's usually kind of goes down, in, out. It looks like you have that line actually there. So I think you could have used that, but I don't see it that clearly. And then down and then back. And even if you have a little bit of cheek kind of coming out, usually doesn't go past the zygomatic arch. So it usually would line up about with it and then come in. So nice stuff. Good start. Again, watch out for those concavities in the neck. You don't want to do that. It's not a good practice. This is a really fun piece. I know we had this issue with the warm and the cool, and then it switched over to doing light and dark, which is confusing and unnecessary. So whatever. That's how the people design the course. I can't take credit for designing this particular course, but that's just what it is. Nice likeness. I think the warm and cool is really accentuating the form. So even though it's really light, I mean, over here it's basically the same value as here, but the warm and cool of it is helping to get that sense of light and darkness, even where you don't have a strong contrast. And so that actually creates something kind of interesting that I like. Proportions look good and volume look really good. I think you could maybe get a little bit more sense of some of the shadow that's happening on the eye. The eye is kind of popping out, especially this one, where it looks really light. Again, think of the eyeball as, you know, a round form, you know, primarily, not just as a symbolic white space, but it's a round form itself that's going to take on light, halftone, shadow, reflected light, and so forth. So I think that's something you can kind of pull out, but apart from that, this looks great. I think this is a really nice piece. And then this one, there's some, I like that you're drawing in the mirror. I think that's really fun. It adds something to the overall design, which is really nice. It kind of fleshes out the composition a little bit further. I feel like the face feels just a little bit flat, and just a little bit more modeling on the form, maybe direction of the light would probably be nice. Again, in the eyes you could get some, maybe just a sense of where the cheeks are. It's hard to read exactly what the light is doing. It might be frontal, but even at frontal, you usually get a little bit of a, you know, some shadow on the side of the face. Looks like the proportions are pretty good. I think you fixed, you know, the element where the eyes felt a little big. Looks like there's a little bit more mass to the head and the hair, which is working nicely. So yeah, I think this is a fun piece. The design I think is my favorite part of it. So yeah, very nice work, and I think I do believe that is it. All right, everybody, I hope that that's helpful for you. Please let me know if you have any questions or anything that I can help you with this week. All right, take care, and I'll see you soon.